Let me start. I'm Mayor Ralph Becker. Just start by welcoming everyone to participate with us on this Homeless Facilities Commission, and particularly to thank Gail Miller and Palmer DePaulis, two icons in our community, for agreeing to co-chair this. This is a matter that I'd say has been brewing and evolving and gaining momentum in the community for a long, long time, but seems to have been, for a whole variety of reasons, just escalating for the last couple of years. And thankfully, due to sort of our great staff in the city, our close coordination with the county, with all of the service providers, with the businesses and neighbors in the area, we really decided that we need to make some decisions that we can all hopefully wrap our arms around for the future of our homeless facilities, which we all value in this community, and to coordinate that effort with the county and the work that Mayor McAdams is doing. He's going to speak in just a minute around the future of these facilities and how we're going to move forward in the most beneficial way for everyone involved. And so that's why we're gathered here. We're gathered, I think, to look at whether or not the sites should remain where they are, and as they are. We're looking at whether or not they should be improved. We're looking at how to mitigate the persistent problems that we're experiencing by homeless individuals, or as Pamela Atkinson would always say, by our homeless friends, by the residents, by the business owners, and by the community at large, and whether or not these services and facilities should be relocated. And those are very tough issues, and we all know that, all of us who've been around these issues for a long time now. And we are coming at this without any preconceived notion. I'm talking about on behalf of the city, and I know with the co-chairs, without any preconceived notions about the outcomes. That the benefit of a healthy dialogue and a healthy process, as hopefully we've put together, is that we're putting everything on the table. We're going to have a good discussion. And at the end, after we've been hearing each other and gaining information and becoming better informed and considering alternatives, we'll arrive at something that we can all agree on, or certainly achieves a really strong consensus, that we can then recommend to the various decision makers with the strength of the community behind it. So, as I said, I'm really appreciative. I know for each of you, you're incredibly busy in your lives. For some of you, this is the highest priority in your life, and for others of you, it's just because of both your keen interest or experience or really direct involvement in the neighborhood around the Depot District and Pioneer Park. And so I'm particularly appreciative of everyone being involved. We're going to talk through today what we're a timeline and what we're hoping to do as we go through the next several months together, working through this together. And meetings are one part, and there will be obviously kind of ongoing effort apart from the meetings and in between the meetings as well. So with that, let me turn the time over to Ben McAdams, Mayor McAdams, who not only is a great partner to the city and to all of us in working with homeless facilities, but I think is bringing some creative and new approaches in terms of services, and we are joined at the hip in terms of how we work together on these matters. And with Ben, it's more on the services side. For the city, it's more on the facilities side. So we want to make sure we're well coordinated in our work going forward. So, Mayor McAdams.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Mayor Becker. And it's great to be with you and to highlight this strong partnership between Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County as we look to support the individuals who find themselves in crisis in our community and help them to move to stability, as we look to do so in a way that recognizes the challenges our community at large faces. You know, I checked my email earlier this week. I saw the Jon Stewart piece. Now, many of you, I think, have seen it. If you haven't, you need to check it out. But checked my email to see if we were canceling the meeting, because apparently there are no homeless people in Salt Lake. But we are still here, and we all know. I want to recognize, I think, an important piece of the conversation that we're having today and our ongoing work is that there are two very important points. One is that we are a national leader in the services we deliver to our homeless community and helping people in crisis and need move to stability. And let's, in the midst of this conversation, I don't want to lose that. Take a moment to pat, I say ourselves on the back. I am not the person to pat on the back, but pat our providers and others on the back for the incredible work you are doing in very tough circumstances to take people from crisis and move them to stability, and have made Utah a national leader for the great work that we do, and I want to say thank you. I also recognize that we do have challenges, that there are, despite the Jon Stewart piece, there are homeless people in Utah, and they have needs, and we are here to explore how we address those needs for the sake of those individuals and for the community who is impacted by being in proximity to the services that we provide. When I think about why I'm here today and maybe why we are here today, I think of the tax dollars that are spent and how we can do so efficiently. I think of the impacts on the community, the businesses that are impacted. But when I get right to the core of what motivates me to be here today, I think of I have a name to that. His name, amongst other names, is John, and John I see is here today. In fact, John. John, I've gotten to know over the last 7 years or so because he is a squeaky wheel who always gives me a hard time, is one of those constituents who demands input and feedback, and I've come to know John as a constituent who provides incredible input to the work that I do, and I'm grateful to have that. I also have come to know John as somebody who was formerly homeless, who lived on the streets for many years, in and out of housing. And John is one of the recipients of first of all, the Housing First model. When Salt Lake in the state of Utah embarked on Housing First, John was one of the first people to receive an opportunity to live in Palmer Court. And with that, John began the road to stability and to becoming the thorn in many elected officials' sides that he is, and I say that jokingly, but to provide input and feedback to us, to me, on an array of topics. And I think of where John is today. He's no longer in permanent supportive housing. He's in Section 8 housing, and John is stable and a contributing member of our community. And so when I think about the work that we're doing today, and I think about some of the frustrations and problems that we complain about that are impacting our community, and those are real complaints and real frustrations, I wonder how many of those people are Johns in the future, who will be the beneficiary of services that will move them from being a problem to being a valuable and contributing member of our public and civic dialogue and discourse, and how can we best help them move from crisis to stability. So I want to, I'm grateful to be a part of and to bring Salt Lake County's leadership to this important conversation. I want to highlight a couple of things about how Mayor Becker and I have agreed to structure this conversation. Now, we recognize Salt Lake County, along with the state of Utah, are the primary funders of homeless services in the state. Many of the nonprofits and other providers who perform an incredible work do so with the support of the taxpayers of Salt Lake County and the state of Utah, and I think we have some valuable things to bring to that conversation. So the city certainly is home base for many of those services and feels the impact of those services in a very real way. So Mayor Becker and I have agreed to work in close partnership with the city leading out on this conversation that we're having today about the location of facilities and whether those facilities should be relocated. There's a parallel and incredibly important conversation happening at the county that we launched last week on Thursday about how we deliver services. Are there gaps in services? How can we improve the delivery of the services and the continuity of services we provide as we seek to reach out to members of our homeless community, our homeless friends, and move them from crisis to stability. And that conversation was launched last week by Salt Lake County. We will continue to lead on the services piece of this conversation over the next year with the conversation through a similar forum that was launched last week. I see some faces here today who did not participate in the forum last week, and many of you were there, but we also want to extend an invite if you're interested in the services side of it to join us. We will have our next meeting end of February. We're narrowing in on a date today, so I can pass around a sign-up sheet if you're interested in participating in that conversation. We can include you on the mailing list for that part of the conversation as well, and look forward to being an active participant as we move these two pieces, and we understand that these two pieces are related. You can't have a conversation about services without examining facilities, and facilities are the places where services are delivered, and the location of facilities is important as we look to fill any gaps in services and move that forward. So we understand that those two conversations are related. We felt that it was appropriate to lead this two-pronged approach to maximize on our strengths and our areas of focus as we move forward, and we look forward to receiving your input and collaboration on this two-pronged approach into the future. So thank you. I'll pass around. I think my staff handed me this is information if you're interested in being on the email list for the services committee that Salt Lake County is leading.
Okay, thank you. I don't have an agenda in front of me, so I assume we're just going to be free-flowing here. But before we go into that part of the meeting, which Michelle Strobey is unfortunately, with her incredible skill, going to be conducting, I'd like to turn time over to both former mayor, I'm going to call you Mayor DePaulis, and to Gail Miller, who are co-chairing this effort.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Palmer DePaulis, and both Gail and I have been talking about how best to facilitate the meetings. We're going to try and divide those duties up, and today I've been elected to be the MC for most of the meeting itself, and then Gail will do a little bit of a summary at the end, and we'll kind of reverse those roles as we go so that we can share the responsibilities. So what we have, just as a matter of housekeeping, we'll do some introductions for everyone to introduce themselves in just a minute, and then Gail and I will take a few minutes to introduce some of the topics and the structure, and then we'll go to Michelle Strobey, who has agreed to facilitate some of our conversations for us, and we'll talk about some issues that we will raise there for everyone to be on board with, hopefully. And then finally, we will hear a short presentation towards the end of the session from Matt Mikovich on behalf of the shelter providers. And then we'll have, of course, some discussion and questions as we go. So that's the general sense of how we'll proceed. So I guess, first of all, I would like to have everyone introduce themselves. And we're a very large group, so I'm just going to ask that you introduce yourself and then tell us where you serve, what your business is, where you live, whomever you represent as part of the interest in this process. And I'm going to start with Fred down at the end of this side, and we'll come around. And then it'll come back to Gail and I. But I do want to, before we do introductions, just want to reiterate and thank both Mayor Becker and Mayor McAdams for convening this process. They are serving as our conveners. We wanted everyone here to know that there's a great deal of political will behind this process. And while Gail and I will take us through the conversations and guide all of this, I just want to thank the mayors for stepping up to do this at this time, which is, in my opinion, a perfect time to have this discussion. So with that, thank you, mayors. I want to turn a minute over to Fred, and we'll just come around the room and go all the way back to Michelle.
Thanks. I don't think I need a mic for those of you that know me. I'm actually filling in for Chief Burbank today. I'm the Deputy Chief assigned to the Metro Support Bureau, which is the downtown district.
I'm Ann Alexander, and I'm homeless representative and advocate.
Thank you, Ann, for being here.
Scott Howell with the Pioneer Park Coalition.
Scott?
Brad Gregg with Catholic Community Services. I've been delegated this opportunity from Bishop Foster.
Thank you.
I'm Kathy Bray. I'm the president and CEO of Volunteers of America, Utah. We're one of the service providers for homeless individuals and also provide behavioral health services in Salt Lake County.
Forrest McNabb, BD Construction, Executive Vice President.
Okay.
Captain Board.
Okay, for those that, he didn't have the mic, Forrest McNabb, Big D Construction.
Christian Harrison, Downtown Community Council, 8 years, and I live on Pioneer.
Greg Miller, Murray H. Miller Companies, and concerned citizen, and help find a solution.
Thanks.
Chris Crosswhite, I represent the Restitution Salt Lake. We're a shelter, we're a meal provider, as well as inpatient recovery services.
Okay, are you able to hear without, okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Joanne Sabini, Mayor of Newville City, proud supporter of the overflow shelter.
Lane Beatty with the Salt Lake Chamber.
Good, thanks, Lane.
Heather Atkinson, community advocate, working with homeless, low-income people, and refugees.
Gail,
Spencer Cox, Lieutenant Governor of the City of Utah. I also chair the Homeless Coordinating Council for the state.
Patrick Reed, substituting for Steve Peterson of the LDS Church Welfare Department.
Laura Michalski, I'm the CEO at 4th Street Clinic. We're a healthcare provider for the homeless.
Harris Simmons with Zions Med Corporation, and also president of Shelter the Homeless Committee, which owns the actual shelter.
Jason Mathis with the Downtown Alliance.
Mikkel Moore, Vice President of Community Benefit for Intermountain Health Care and Health Delivery.
Thank you, Mikkel.
Matt Minkovich, and I serve at the
Sheree Wood, Mayor of South Salt Lake City.
Carlton Christensen with Salt Lake County, and also a former member of the Salt Lake City Council.
Mike Stransky, GSBS Architects. We also own a building on the corner of 2nd South and 4th West, just east of St. Vincent de Paul.
Bryson Garbett with the Pioneer Park Coalition.
Don Vila, Vice President of Goldman Sachs.
Michelle Strobey, I'm the Director of the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program at the University of Utah Law School, and I have the honor of facilitating this group.
Thanks, Michelle. I think we should probably let people know who staff are that's helping us with this. And so, Mary, I'm going to ask you to stand and introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Mary Delmar Schaefer. I'm the Acting Director for Community and Economic Development. I'm delighted that you all are here. Thank you very much.
Okay, and Jill?
Elizabeth. I'm Jill Love, and I'm with Mayor Becker's office. I'm Elizabeth Bueller. I am in the city's Housing and Neighborhood Development Department.
Okay. And Bill?
Bill Evans, Assistant
Okay. Bill has been very active helping us with some of our meetings, and he'll be assisting us as we go through the process. Is there anyone else? Yes?
Mike Ackerlow, Director of Housing and Neighborhood Development for Salt Lake City.
Have we had all the staff members, Mary? Okay. Before I make comments and then turn the mic over to Gail, I have a couple things I want to do. First, I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for being part of this process. He's given up some very valuable time. As you know, the session has started. And that's
thanking you.
Yeah. We're pulling him away from some very important issues. So we're delighted that you're here. And then I also want to, our two other mayors that are serving on the commission, just to recognize you and Carlton as a former council member as well. I hope I haven't left anyone out, but I just wanted to especially thank the Lieutenant Governor for his participation. And I understand when you are unable to be here, it'll be John Pierpont that will help out, and John's back, so he'll provide some continuity there. I know that some of you, from time to time, if you have to have someone stand in, like Fred is standing in for the chief, although we're going to ask Fred to be here all the time as well. He's a very important part of this whole process. But just let us know that. And then one other thing, as you all can see, this is a very, very large commission. We're going to have about 6 of these kinds of meetings throughout the year. There's going to be 2 opportunities for public input. If those, I don't know what format we'll do that in yet. It might be very, hopefully, interactive, more of an open house kind of thing. But we want to try and reach out to everyone who has thoughts about the process that we're undertaking and make sure that we hear from everyone. So we've tried to provide for that. But we also are going to work in between meetings in smaller groups, and we're going to try and mix those groups up a little bit so that we can hear from each other and hear different thoughts and views as we go along as well. So that's part of how we're going to try to reach some good thinking, some productive thinking, because obviously we can't do it all in meetings of this size. So with that being said, I just wanted to offer a couple thoughts here at the very beginning from my standpoint, and then I'll turn the mic over to Gail to offer some thoughts as well. We know that this is obviously a very, I call it a daunting process. I mean, this is not easy. It is going to be very challenging. Whenever we take up issues like this as a community, it's very important that we recognize how clearly important it is, but also how difficult it is. As part of that, just getting to the point in the email letter that you received from Gail and I, just to get some key options on the table. That is, you know, keeping the shelter where it is in terms of, this is about the relocation part, keeping the shelter where it is, improving what we have, or the possibility of moving it. Just getting those topics on the table has caused a lot of concern, a little bit of consternation. And I've heard this directly, and some of it I've either read or heard secondhand, but some have said that the outcome has already been decided. That's not true, but I wanted to mention to you just some of the things that are kind of floating around in this whole process. Some have said the process won't work, that the process is flawed, that it's not compassionate enough. Some have said that all of this must move. Some have said no, it shouldn't move. Some have said we just really need to solve problems that are very persistent, and the list goes on and on. Everyone, I think, has a position on this matter. But from my point of view, if we're going to have a really thoughtful, a deliberative, careful, productive conversation, a difficult conversation. In fact, I've heard in some of the meetings I've attended with you before we started today, a courageous conversation. We're going to need to abandon our positions. And I think instead, we're going to have to really dig a lot deeper. And as digging deeper, we're going to have to talk about our best interests. And I'm convinced that if we really understand each other's best interests and the best interests of this community and satisfy those interests, we'll be able to provide and find a very productive way forward. So that's, from my sense, what I hope is really going to be a good outcome for this group. And as I said, we're going to have to do this not only in these larger groups, but in smaller groups as well. And I thank you in advance for being here. This is really an awesome group. And I want to again thank the mayors for convening us. And now I'd like to turn some time over to Gail.
I too am grateful to be a part of this commission. When the mayor called me and asked me to co-chair it, I said I'd be glad to help, but I don't want to be a figurehead. I want to do some work. I want to find a solution. And I'm grateful to be able to work with all of you because you do have good solutions, I'm sure, that will come forward. And as we explore the interests of each of you, which will be a very thorough process, it will take time and it will take cooperation and it will take a lot of work. But we want to hear what you have to say and we want your help. Personally, I have a vested interest in this project. Many years ago, Larry and I talked about helping the homeless in some significant way, and there were some suggestions made at the time, but none of them were the right thing at the right time. I live in Salt Lake City. I have businesses in Salt Lake City. I have family that lives downtown. I will soon live downtown myself. I care about all of these people. I care about the homeless. I want Salt Lake City to be a model city that thoughtfully and compassionately meets and addresses the needs of all of our citizens. We want people to come here, to live here, and to feel safe here. We want those who are experiencing homelessness to be given the best services possible and to help them transition out of their difficult circumstances. We want them as well to feel safe and to not be preyed upon. And those are the things that guide me in this position, and I hope that we can all work together and find a solution to this most challenging problem in our committee, or in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. We have pledged ourselves, by the way, to meet as often as it takes to help lead this effort. And I have to tell you, I've been very impressed with Gail, and I hope she's been impressed with me as how we brought this process together. But I also wanted to thank all of the, both in the county and the city, those that have helped us get to today. Now I'd like to turn, and by the way, I'll be taking a little bit of the MC role for this meeting, and then we'll mix that back and forth between Gail and I. But I'm going to turn some time over now to Michelle Strobe, and then maybe you can introduce yourself again, just a little information on yourself. Michelle, I know a lot of people here know you, have worked with you, you've worked on other city issues, but for those that haven't, if you could just do that and then touch on our first conversation.
Okay. So you probably all hopefully expected that there would be a lot of blah, blah, blah at you during this first meeting. In future meetings, there will be many more opportunities for conversation in the group. So I'm not apologizing, I'm just letting you know I'm gonna blah, blah, blah at you a little longer, and then it's gonna come from other people as well. So a little introduction about myself. I started out as a lawyer. I discovered mediation and facilitation maybe 15 years into that, and was totally sold and have done nothing but alternative dispute resolution, mediation, facilitation since that time, mostly on environmental and other public policy issues. I think about the homeless issues as the urban environment. So that's how I can justify it to our funders, that the students and my staff and I spend time on this issue. When Mayor Becker was first elected, he very kindly asked whether I would help him put together a collaborative governance initiative, which at the time was called Salt Lake Solutions. It's kind of morphed into other things now, and I was honored to do that for a few years. I then have now been asked to start a program where starting into our 4th year actually at the law school, an environmental dispute resolution program, and I think it was last year. As part of that, students and I were asked to do a situation assessment, which hopefully many of you have read at least the executive summary, but a situation assessment on homeless issues in downtown Salt Lake City. And so I had 6 students, and I did interviews actually with many of you sitting around the table, and with over 60 people, to try to figure out kind of what's already happening, what do people see as possibilities, and we summarized that and gave some suggestions of strategic places where the city could provide additional coordination or leadership to make sure. And so Mayor Becker and McAdams both have kind of talked about how the two efforts really dovetail together. So now I've been asked to facilitate this group, so I'm happy to be here. Yes?
How would we find that report?
Yes. Thank you. It's a wonderful question, and I think in a follow-up email to this meeting, we should send some links to that report. Would that make it easy for you?
And let me just add, at least I think from staff standpoint, we're going to have a website. Is that right? We have it up? This website is up?
We do. I will send a link after that.
Okay, so all of the materials, all of the information, things that we talk about, we're going to just put on this website, which will be accessible for everyone. And then the material will be also there.
And it will have links, or perhaps already does have links, to the assessment and the executive summary and the appendices. The one thing I want to emphasize is that I work, my program and we work as a neutral, as a third-party neutral. So our efforts in all the work that we do is to try to get all the voices to be heard and to hear each other. So I and our program do not have any vested interest, sort of to support what Palmer said. We have no vested interest in what the outcome of this commission's work is, or what ultimately happens with homeless services, the location of the services and the providers. We have no opinion and no vested interest in what that outcome is. We just hope that we can be helpful in getting to an outcome that everyone hopefully is comfortable with. So with that, let me segue to sort of some of the process observations that I'd like to make at the beginning of the group, because that's what facilitators do. It's also, unfortunately, what professors do. But okay, so I want to pick up on Palmer's talking about interests and not focusing immediately on solutions. The city and I have talked, we want to use the Harvard model of collaborative problem solving, which really focuses on interests and waits to talk about potential solutions until you've explored what all the interests, what all the needs are. You throw a lot of possibilities out, and then you start talking about, then you start creating potential solutions. So let me tell a little story, the story of the orange first, because hopefully it puts the concept into a very simplistic way that you can understand it, and then we can apply it to the more difficult problems that we're working with here. So imagine there was one parent, one orange, and 2 children. And both of the children were fighting over this orange very loudly. And the parent, being very busy, as parents these days are, said, oh, you kids have to just figure this out for yourself. And the kids couldn't do it. So the parent said, fine, I'm cutting the orange in half. And it was done. And the kids are still fighting. They were like, that didn't solve my problem. So the parent stopped and thought, oh gosh, I need to ask some more questions. So let me ask some questions. Ask child number 1, why did you want the orange? Well, I'm baking a cake, and my recipe calls for the rind of an entire orange, not the rind of a half an orange. The other child, why did you want the orange? Okay, everybody sees where this is going, but I have to finish the story. The other child says, I was thirsty, and I need the juice of the entire orange because the juice of half an orange is not really going to do much for my thirst. And the parent realized if I had asked some more questions at first, we could have found a solution that would have satisfied the interests or the needs of both of the children. Okay, so here, the way we are structuring this process is to have you look first at some of the major objectives, might even call them criteria, the things that are important to each of you, and there will be different things that are more or less important to each of you in the commission and in the community. The things that are important to you in evaluating potential sites or in looking at a site. It's not in the abstract because we're all living in it, but in the abstract without having particular locations in mind. And from that also then to learn a little bit about the best practices of siting homeless services, and only after we've sort of, as a group, after you've had that conversation and done some thinking about that, then start looking at potential locations and comparing those to the criteria that I've come up with. So that's sort of the interest-based process that we hope to do with you as a group. Second thing that I would like to talk about is sort of the process for reaching agreement within the group that I'm hoping you all can go along with the co-chairs and me. So Palmer used the word consensus, I think, and I hope that this group is willing to strive for consensus at least. So consensus, when I talk about it with my students, is a noun. It's an ultimate goal, an accomplishment. When you reach consensus, it's a most wonderful thing. But I think of it as a verb as well, so to consent, I suppose, but actually, well, think about it as striving for consensus. And what that means really is that we don't vote. It's not a majority vote or a supermajority vote or anything like that. We don't necessarily vote on things. We have conversations about interests, about different solutions. Nobody has veto power. So I hesitate to say I encourage disagreement. On the other hand, I encourage everyone in the group to honestly say what you like about options, about different issues. If you don't like something, that's great. Say it. But also, right after that, I don't like it because it doesn't meet, you don't have to use my words, but it doesn't meet my interests, my needs in X, Y, Z ways, so that the whole group can understand what the objection is, and the whole group then shares responsibility to come up with new ideas, hopefully, that can start integrating everybody's interests and needs, and hopefully come up with creative things that perhaps can meet all the interests and needs. So that's sort of striving for consensus. I've done it with quite a few groups by now, including ranchers, most of whom at first look at me like I'm nuts when I start talking about it. And at the end of the process, when they've actually reached consensus, they go, wow, that like becomes a way of being. That's the way I think I'm going to be from now on about everything that I'm in disagreement with. So I hope that after we're done with this group, you will also be consensus converts. But anyway, so I hope everybody will work with me to strive for consensus rather than saying, I don't like that, and sticking to whatever it is you came in with as potentially your perfect solution. And the final thing that I want to talk about, which is what facilitators always talk about, there they are, ground rules. Okay, behavioral norms, the way we talk with each other, whatever you'd like me to call it. I have on the poster are the ground rules that I usually use, and they're pretty much what you learned in kindergarten. There's nothing particularly exciting or controversial about them. Although if I had copyrighted them, I would be a rich woman now. Okay, but I have scribbled down at the bottom is actually my newest overall ground rule that I use now that sort of encompasses all those details. And I want to tell another little story about that. So this sort of overall encompassing ground rule is, or behavioral norm, is to take personal responsibility for the energy that you bring to the conversation. And the story behind that and why I've adopted this, and it's actually, people tend to like it, it seems like, is there's a neuroscientist, Jill Bolte Taylor. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her book or her TED Talk. She had a stroke. And as a neuroscientist, she then documented the stroke and her recovery from the stroke and wrote a book about it, and now there's the coolest TED Talk about it as well. And in her stroke, the emotional part of her brain was the part that remained functioning. The analytical part of her brain was the part that was not functioning and needed to be rebuilt. And in her hospital room, what she noticed as she was trying to rebuild the analytical side of her brain was that a lot of her friends and family and perhaps even doctors and helpers came in with a really sad and sort of negative, pitying type of attitude. And the emotional side of her brain just kind of glommed onto that negative emotion and couldn't pay attention to the analytical side. So she, in fact, put up a ground rule on the door of her hospital room that said, please take personal responsibility for the energy you bring into this space. And she found that people could. They could, in fact, come in supportive, positive, and it really changed the dynamic for her working within the analytical part of her brain and helping to restructure that. And I have found with the groups that I work with, we do all have personal control over how we present topics. So again, disagreement is good. It's fine. That's where creativity sits, is in disagreement. But how we talk about that disagreement, how we express it, that is in our control, and I'm hoping that everyone will work with the group to stick to the issues, to to be constructive, not make it personal, to take personal responsibility for how it is we have the conversation that we're going to have in this room. So I'm not going to call on each of you individually, but hopefully generally that's okay. Looking around, a few head nods would be nice. Okay, good, thank you. Great. Okay, so we have a wide range of perspectives in the group, which was very intentional. We also have I'm thinking a wide range of understanding and experience with the issues. So in every one of the 6 meetings, there will be some educational component, hopefully not at the most basic level. And for the most part, to the extent that somebody feels that they need to be brought up to speed more than what we can do within the meetings, please feel free to come talk to me or to the co-chairs or to Bill Evans, and we can provide all the information you need kind of offline. But just so you know, we are going to try to have some sort of educational, everybody coming to the same level of understanding part of every meeting. But again, as I mentioned, in future meetings, there is going to be more opportunity for group conversation. Final thing is, I don't know if the media is still here, but the media was already here at 12:30 or 12:45, very interested in what this group is doing. I hope that you will let the co-chairs, Palmer DePaulis and Gail Miller, speak for the commission to the extent there's even anything to be said for the commission, which will take some time. But I hope that you will let them speak for the commission. And by that, I don't mean to discourage anyone from speaking to the press, but when you do, please make it very clear that you're speaking about the commission or about the issues from your own interests. Whoever it is that you're here representing, you're speaking to them on your own behalf, if you are giving opinions, your own opinions, and not the commission's opinions. I think it will just reduce confusion to the extent that's even possible by letting the co-chairs speak on behalf of the commission. Okay, are we good? Did I cover what I was supposed to? So with that, the first educational piece, actually, that we're going to have, Matt Minkovich has agreed that he will give an overview.
Michelle,
Yes.
before we bring, and we do have the time because we're doing well on time. I just wondered if you would, for the group, if you could demonstrate some difference between, because we're going to ask everyone to come back, particularly for our next meeting, for this part of the conversation, with interests. But if you could give some examples of where interests would differ from positions, just so everyone has an idea of what to think about in that regard before Matt starts.
Sure. So, this is still on. In the context of the things that we're talking about, a position would be, I think, that the current facilities, including the shelter, should move away from the Rio Grande area. I think they should not move away from the Rio Grande area. Those both are solutions. Those are positions. The interests would be things, and I'm pulling things from what we heard in the assessment. The things that concern me are safety and my personal safety, and we heard that actually across all the interests, starting with individuals who stay overnight at the road home to people who work and live in the area. So my personal safety is an interest. The fact that there's so much drug traffic around, that's an interest. The fact that, I don't know that it's a fact, I'm sorry. If somebody believes that homeless services, it is good to cluster them together in a close area so that the homeless individuals can access a lot of services without having to, take tracks or whatever all over creation. Again, that would be somebody's interest. Granted, it's an opinion, but it's not getting to the final solution. Is that good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just wanted and I don't know if there are any questions about that, but I just wanted to, give some examples of, what interests are. For example, I've heard from some of the business community members, it's not only the safety issue, but they want good access to their establishments. I hear this from the providers too, by the way. And that's hopefully the thing that will bring us together is if we begin to understand and can satisfy each other's interests. So those are interests. Those are, I don't want to belabor it either, but we're going to ask you to think about that before we meet in a larger group the next time, because we want to have a pretty thorough discussion and hear from people individually about what those interests are. Some of that we'll do in small groups in between, but we really want to get on the table all of the things that you recognize as interests. It would be very helpful to hear from our homeless representative what some of the interests are from a homeless standpoint of what makes a difference, what matters. So as we go through, I just wanted to take a little extra time just to kind of delineate that, because I think it's really important for our whole process to understand what those interests are, and that'll be part of our work the next time around, and part of it in the small groups as well, so that we can begin to hear each other in that context. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, Michelle. Gail, is there anything else that you?
I would just like to add that I think when we discuss interests, it lays a platform for the ability to say and discuss things in a reasonable way rather than taking a stand and having to hold fast to it. It opens up the discussion. So that would be the way I would prefer to do it.
Thanks. Okay, Michelle, do you want to?
We may need to do a little setting up, I'm not sure.
Well, Matt is doing that. I just wanted to reiterate again what Michelle said about the opportunities we will have in these larger meetings, also to hear from providers, from business owners, from residents, from the coalition. We want to be able to provide an opportunity for all of us to have a little bit of a formal presentation as part of the larger group settings. You will probably be inundated with material. The website is going to have an awful lot of material. We hope that you can go through that material and digest some of it. Gail and I have talked about this, we are not going to try and reinvent all the studies that have already happened. We have information out there that we can use, and we have experiences that we can rely on. So we're not going to try in this commission to reinvent all of that. We're going to draw from it. It's another source or point of information for us. And now I think, Matt, are you just about ready?
I think so, Palmer.
Okay.
I think the microphone that I have on is not working, and so I'm going to take that off, and I'm going to use this handheld microphone. Also, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I think should come up. But in the event that it does not, can everyone hear me? Okay. In the event that it does not, Elizabeth, it says Control Alt Delete. I'm going to do that. That is so cool. Okay. Let's get us there. Yeah, then we have I have a PowerPoint, but I also have a handout that you could follow with, just in the event that we have any difficulty. There's also some other information in there which will not be included in the presentation, because I do want to respect your time. There's a lot of information. I want to apologize in advance for some of the providers which I may fail to mention. But we work with a variety of providers in our service delivery network, all of whom are invaluable to helping each other to provide services to so many who come to our doors in need. So with that, let's start. My name is Matt Minkovich. I serve as the Executive Director of the Road Home. Many of you know the Road Home as the agency that operates the emergency shelter on 210 South Rio Grande Street. In addition to that, we also operate a shelter in the wintertime, serving predominantly families in Midvale. That facility is operated out of a warehouse that was once built to store celery back in 1946, and we finally got control of that asset. We're going to tear it down and rebuild it to something that is better befitting the families who turn to us in their time of need. In addition to providing emergency shelter, we also provide emergency services. People come to us for blankets, coats, hygiene items. We help with transportation. Sometimes people are needing to get from Utah to a different destination, a destination where we can verify they have a support network, they have employment, and we help them to get there from here. One of the big things that we're doing now is we're providing housing, and I'll go into that in a little more detail moving forward. And we also provide case management, supportive services for people who need a little bit of coaching, a little bit of support to help them to develop a plan, to help them get out of shelter, to help them to get out of homelessness, to help them to get out of their immediate situation toward a better situation. We collaborate with Catholic Community Services. Specifically, we share space with Catholic Community Services at the Wigan Resource Center. That's where our emergency services teams providing many of the services that I just described. But also in the winter, we use the St. Vincent de Paul Center, and that's incredibly important because at the St. Vincent de Paul Center is where we can take in individuals, mostly gentlemen, who have had too much to drink or rather inebriated or otherwise personally compromised in such a manner that we can just get them in, get them some dry clothing, get them on a mat, provide them some warmth, and oversee them throughout the course of the night to protect them from the elements. I think that the services that we provide in collaboration with the St. Vincent de Paul Center are life-saving, frankly, and we're very grateful to have that opportunity. We also work with 4th Street Clinic. They provide medical expertise, as many of you know, but we also have beds in the shelter where 4th Street Clinic is providing case management services. Someone who has been discharged from the hospitals in our area, who has enough health to be discharged, but is still compromised enough that being on the streets presents difficulty. And so our work with 4th Street is very important because they have the expertise in terms of medical case management which they provide, and we have some beds. So we provide the beds and work in concert with our friends at 4th Street. The rescue mission. Now, I bring up the rescue mission in the, we don't have formal working arrangements. We're not sharing any contracts with the rescue mission, but the rescue mission is critically important. Salt Lake City mission, frankly, is too, because they provide a kind of shelter that is more accessible to someone who might have shyness or real social anxiety. We're a big shelter. We're pretty crowded. It's intimidating. And it would be hard for many of us in this room to come into our shelter and spend the night there. And what I appreciate about what the Rescue Mission and the Salt Lake City Mission are doing is providing a little more intimate atmosphere. Consider it a cozy cafe where you would want to take a close friend versus a large diner that's loud and rather raucous. Where would you rather take your loved one for a date, for example? Well, probably not the City Rescue Mission or the Salt Lake Rescue Mission or the Road Home, but if you had a choice of the three, you might take the smaller of them. Whoops, and I went too far. Anyway, we work with Volunteers of America, and Volunteers of America, we there at Volunteers of America are providing supportive case management for people that are in substance abuse, addiction, and recovery. And we provide some beds to Volunteers of America. Can you move back? That's okay, let's leave that be. We provide some beds for for Volunteers of America, but Volunteers of America in turn provides more specialized case management that helps people who are trying to overcome addiction, who are in recovery. And we're working with them and with their expertise so that they can provide people a way out of addiction. And that's critically important. I'll point out that Salt Lake, our friends at the Rescue Mission also provide spiritually based recovery services as well. And one of our largest collaborations is with the Department of Workforce Services. We have job finders who work on site at the shelter, but also are working in our permanent supportive housing to help people link up with employment. That's a challenging task. We turn to our friends who are experts at the Department of Workforce Services to help provide an outlet for people who are looking to increase their income through employment. DWS is one of our bigger partners, and it is through their offices that the Homeless Trust Fund, known as the Pamela Atkinson Homeless Trust Fund, comes down to providers all across the state, and also the Olene Walker Housing Loan Fund, which is very important because housing provides a way out of homelessness, and the Olene Walker Housing Loan Fund provides funding to developers who are creating low-cost housing as an alternative for people who would otherwise turn to emergency shelters. And I better mention the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I think all of us recognize how incredibly important the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is in providing volunteers, hundreds of volunteers annually, and providing commodities. I think I can speak for every nonprofit in the room that's providing human services. We have some connection to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which helps us with a variety of things and also with critical funding that help our operations. Okay, our budget, I'll give you a glimpse at our budget. In 2004, we were about $4 or $5 million. About $1 million of that went into housing. And of that $1 million, we had one contract that provided about $300,000 in rental assistance payments. That contract came down from the federal government to the county housing authority, and to us. And that was rental assistance payments that helped people get out of homelessness, get into housing, and we could start help paying the rent. One of the interests that we have, if I could suggest our interest at the Road Home, is housing, because we see housing as a permanent solution to one's homelessness. Now we'll fast forward to 2014. We're about a $13 million budget. About 6.7 million of that is now in housing. I also want to point out that the majority of that is from competitive grants where we've collaborated with others to bring in usually federal money that prior to this had not been coming into Utah. So we were able to secure these dollars by demonstrating some housing efforts that were successful and competing nationwide to bring these dollars into Utah and really grow our housing efforts and help turn the tide of just being a shelter-based agency to a housing-based agency. Now we have about $3 million in rental assistance payments that are going out in a variety of different contracts in collaborative efforts with some of our providers at the table here, going out to local landlords across the valley to help families or individuals in chronic persistent homelessness secure housing and get back out into the community. Services back in 2004, about 2,100 people served. The bed nights we were providing out of our shelter, under 200,000, about 163. Fewer than 50,000 nights of housing that we were providing, and we always had a waiting list for people trying to get into the shelter. That was a problem for us. We had to become more efficient. 2014. Last year, we served 7,082 people. The total number of nights of shelter we provided, those are bed nights, that's a duplicated count. If you were a hotel, does everyone get what a shelter night is? If you were a hotel and stay at the hotel for 7 nights, you're counted 2 ways. You're counted as one customer, and you've consumed 7 bed nights. So that's the difference. 7,000 different human beings, 349,000 nights of shelter. But in addition to that, and this is an important number, and again, one of our interests, 454, almost 455,000 nights of housing. Why haven't we had to build a bigger shelter when more people came to us over this period of time? I would submit to you that part of the answer lies right there when we're providing more housing nights than we are shelter nights. Roughly 1,100 people nightly are staying with us in our 3 combined shelters during peak season. We have close to that many people staying with us on in our housing programs on any given night, year-round. Some of the things that are working, in our opinion, and I would suggest, I think, in the spirit of Michelle's instruction, here is one of our interests, or some of our interests: housing. We see permanent housing is working. Housing with supportive services, housing for veterans, rapid rehousing for families, but let's not limit it to rapid rehousing for families, housing for families overall. I know I heard it said somewhere along the way, the rent's too darn high. And that's something that our whole valley is experiencing. And we have an interest to see, can we create a different rental stream? Can we create a different rental level that's in this affordable sweet spot where people who are working low-wage jobs can afford to live in the Salt Lake Valley, be able to work and raise their families here, or be able to live in peace and harmony here outside of the shelter. We have over 100% occupancy these days. How does that happen? Well, we're open more than we used to be. We used to be open about 16 hours a day. Then we would close the main dorm. Individuals would have what was called a bed card, and they would be able to keep that bed card with them for about a 90-day period, and they could keep their belongings on their bed in the shelter. And then we would lock up the dorm. It would not be accessible to individuals, and it would become this big storage facility. It's incredibly helpful to someone who got a bed. But we had more and more people who were not showing up for shelter at night, keeping their things at the shelter, individuals waiting to get in and sleeping outside, right outside our shelter. I think the police would remember times when we would have 80 or even 90 individuals sleeping right outside our men's entrance, and we would have to try to carefully wake them and say, okay, it's morning, it's time to get moving. And those were individuals that were waiting to get in beds. Similarly, we had beds in our dorm that were filled with stuff, but not people. So we made a difficult decision, and frankly, I gathered the information from my team as to the cost and benefits, the challenges, the opportunities, and I made the call. And I said, 1 bed for 1 person. Take your stuff in the morning when you leave, bring it back with you when you come back in. At great inconvenience to the individuals who are using shelter, but at the same time, it provides maximum efficiency in making sure a bed serves someone. We have about 30 to 50 beds daily where someone comes in, stays in the shelter for a few hours, gets cleaned up and leaves, and that bed is reused that night. So that bed's been used twice in a day. That's how we go beyond 100% capacity. It's tight, it's very tight, but right now we have room to meet existing demand. Also, shelter is available more hours in the day than ever before. We're open about 21 to 22 hours a day. We shut down to clean and then to bring people back in. Again, it's challenging, but that's what we're doing right now. And we have created housing opportunities with supportive services for some of the most distressed people in our community. And from a very I think a perspective, we have an interest in this. We have an interest in this from a humanitarian standpoint because we recognize that it would be very difficult for some of the people who are currently staying in housing that our collaborations are providing. We think it would be very remote, the possibility of their actually having housing without this assistance. Also, those individuals are living at the shelter. And by helping a person who's living at the shelter get out of shelter, it helps the majority of people who are coming into the shelter for a very short period of time, and I've got a graph that will show there. Okay, key improvements needed. Here's some of the things that we think are not working. Again, an area where we have interest. Okay, that gives me 4 more minutes, so we're quite close. New housing opportunities we feel have constrained. we made these leaps and bounds in our advancement, but our collective effort has stalled, for lack of a better word. It's stalled, it's slowed. We're using some scattered site opportunities, they're out there. We're taking advantage of the market as we can, but there's too much constraint there. Let's remove those constraints. That's in our interest. High concentration of humanity along the Rio Grande corridor. That's of supreme interest to us. I don't think that we like that any more than anyone else in this room. The shelter is congested. That's problematic. That's very problematic. I think of safety, I think of security, I think of a sense of well-being. There are a lot of things that are problematic about that. Long lines, the buck stops right here. I created those. I said, take your stuff out and bring it back in. We want to have every bed occupied. Like TSA, when you go to the airport, we're checking through everyone's things. That takes time. Some people come in with hardly anything. Some people come in with far more than hardly anything. And we're going through it all. Now, we can figure out a better way to create greater facility to get people through, but we think that housing is also an opportunity where people can store their things, not have to wait in long lines, and have a better place to stay. That, again, is an interest for us. But we're also working with an efficiency expert. We're looking at the possibility of, is there a way that we can create a storage possibility outside of the shelter to facilitate the intake of people coming into shelter? So no daily storage is a problem. Drug dealing and drug use outside of the shelter and along that part of town. Not just because of the shelter, of course. There's traffic patterns. There's a lot of reasons that it's quite convenient to pull right off of 4 South, right along 500 West, swing back out, be on the road and on your way wherever with great alacrity and have a small transaction in between that creates a marketplace. We have a real problem with that. We have a real interest in seeing that go away. Shenanigans, I don't know how else to call it. Some of it is very petty. Some of it is not. And we have an interest in seeing some of those behaviors abated, redirected. I think a high concentration of humanity leads to an environment that is it can lead to those kind of shenanigans. We'd like to see that change. Real quick shot here of how people use the shelter. The first, I mentioned before how a hotel counts us as one customer and a number of bed nights. That's us as customers. That's our consumption as bed nights. Group A represents 90% of the people who are coming into shelters, frankly, across America, but this is a 5-year clip of the 22,000 different individuals who stayed at the road home in the past 5 years. Group A, 19,800, almost 20,000 of the 22,000, spent about 34 nights and then moved on. Group B stays over a year, 372 nights. And they're consuming over half of the shelter beds. Shelter for Group B is frankly housing. A little more complicated pie, but look at this. Over here, the number of beds. Look at this little slice of pie. When we go back to the orange, that ain't even a quarter of the orange. This is a little slice. Look how many people are served with that little slice of shelter. Of people who are staying 6 weeks or less. That's what emergency shelter is about. Look at the few people over here that are consuming all of this shelter. Some of them, no doubt, have a variety of personal challenges that would warrant case management. For some, they're working, and the rent's just too darn high. And if we create a housing alternative, our interest suggests, there's something there where people would be willing to pay and be able to keep their things safe and not go to shelter. That concludes it. I do want to point out that all of our financial information and the information I just shared with you can be found online. We're a 4-star Charity Navigator rated agency. That's 4 out of 4 stars. That's an independent agency that looks at nonprofits nationwide and determines if they're functioning in terms of the amount of funding they're using to provide services, their transparency, their metrics and outcomes. I'm open for questions.
Good, and we have a few minutes, Matt. I'm wondering if you'll take some questions.
Please.
From the group. Chris?
Matt, thank you so much. I have 2 questions. Firstly, along the lines of being a service provider to our homeless clinics, what would you imagine Salt Lake City would be like if you and the road home were not providing your services? If there was no road home.
Anywhere. You mean anywhere?
If the road home didn't exist.
I wouldn't even know how to speculate. I really wouldn't. And forgive me, co-chairs. Like, it's so personal. That's asking if I didn't exist. So I can't. I'm at this point in time. I'm having difficulty separating those 2 things. But there are 1,100 people who will be getting shelter tonight. About 240 of whom are children and families, and a number are teens that are just old enough to stay in shelter all by themselves. I don't know where they would go.
My follow-up question, Matt, and I apologize for the difficulty of that question.
Oh, whatever. I'm sorry. I mean, fair.
In addition to being a provider, you're an employer. How many people are employed by the local?
Right now we have 160 full-time equivalents, and that includes about 45 who are working at our Midvale shelter seasonally. We have 3 full-time equivalents right now who are 50 cents an hour, under $10 an hour. In about 6 months, we'll have those 3 up to $10 an hour. It's taken us quite a while to be able to bring those wages up. Yes, sir.
First
Forrest.
of all, Matt, thanks for your group's great work. I have a question. So what keeps you awake at night? If there was one thing tied to the current situation, what keeps you awake at night?
Just
one thing?
Well, no, it's a fair question, and I'm still working off Chris's piece, and sorry that I didn't answer that. It's just the human need. It's the human need. People coming to us so destitute, people coming to us so helpful, people coming to us who are not so destitute but are desperate and don't have a better alternative. So they're coming to shelter as, I just feel that is avoidable for so many, and we haven't quite cracked that nut yet. No way. Yes, Carlson.
Matt, outside of the housing alternative emphasis, are there trends that you see nationally in, not that a lot of new shelters are constructed, but trends that you're seeing in shelters coming online or direction that other communities are taking with their shelter itself?
We're still looking around to see if there's anything tremendously innovative around sheltering. What I think is what we're seeing that's exciting to us is the amount of outreach, reaching out and finding people where they're at. If I could use one very quick anecdote, we had a fellow who was quite behaviorally challenged, and he had come down right during our holiday broadcast. And I thought, oh goodness, we have the governor here, there could be a security issue. I went over to one of our more thoughtful case managers and I said, could you help us out? Let's talk to this fellow. And the first thing out of our case manager's mouth was, is he a vet? Let's see what we can do. Because if he's a veteran, this community has done a remarkable job of creating an inroad into housing through more extensive collaborations than I think I've seen in my professional career, that's getting veterans off of the streets and into housing. Just, do not pass go, or whatever you say, monopoly, getting right into housing off the street, which is great.
Bryson, do you have a question? And then Gail.
So maybe along a little bit with Chris's question, where do your clients come from? Do you track that at all?
Yeah, we do. We do. Now, I do want to point out that this is self-reported information, so I think that the reliability of that information does have a larger standard deviation, I think you would say, or a wider margin, because especially if someone thinks that, oh, I have to be from Salt Lake City in order to stay at the shelter, they might first say, I'm from Salt Lake City, because we provide case management and talk with folks. We find out that most are from Utah. And when I say most, I think our stats are somewhere in the 70% range. I'm looking to one of my coworkers and getting a thumbs up. So coming somewhere from Utah, about 70%. Some of that self-reported, some are coming from anywhere else.
Do you have requirements that, I mean, you interview everybody who comes in. Do you have any requirements that they have to meet to stay in the room?
Yes. For example, we like for people to be sober. That's a high barrier shelter entry, but we look at that with at least some perspective. It's more behavior based. We don't like people bringing in contraband. Contraband would be drugs, alcohol, and paraphernalia that are used for drug use. And that's one of the things that we're searching for, so we're not allowing that in. And that's part of our check-in process. But there are some individuals that might be slightly or moderately elevated on prescription medication or other medications. They're going to come in. We're going to, especially this time of year, they're going to come in, but we're going to watch that behavior. And that's just part of the art. So try to enforce the golden rule, really.
Gail.
Aside from curing the homeless problem altogether, what would your wish list for a solution look like?
There would be an abundance of low-cost housing. So if I'm a fellow like one I knew who was born in 1947 and fancied himself as being 24 years old and was very straight-faced about it, that's how his mind calculated things. He could hold down a certain level of employment. I'd like for him to be able to pay the rent and stay in housing. And I think that there needs to be more housing that is very, very affordable. There's a lot of affordable housing, but there's a spectrum of affordable housing. So a big abundance of very low cost for 20% or 30% of the area median income that is a low barrier for people to get into. Next, I'd like to see housing that has case management services around it. So people don't just move in, shut their door, and sit and suffer. Like some who move in and don't have enough case management services and sit within their own minds and think of the terrible things that are happening to them, and they're very real to them, people with mental wellness challenges. That people don't just go behind those doors and use and don't have access to recovery. So there would be more services available to people who are struggling with addiction, people who are struggling with mental wellness or behavioral challenges. There would be a greater abundance of those things, and we have an interest to see those grow. That's one of our interests that we're bringing to the table, because we think that that will reduce the number of people who are living at the shelter with nowhere else to go.
Ann has a question.
Sure. Ann?
It wasn't really a question. I just, I'm glad I can see everybody now. That's nice. I think, well, are you, I didn't have a question for you particularly, but is it all right to speak?
Sure, go ahead, Ann.
Well, I had a unique perspective in that I lived in the road home for 2 years. And this was because of a dental disaster that I was going through. And never expected to have that opportunity come into my life. I didn't even know there was a shelter downtown. I worked downtown and found myself with $26,000 worth of crowns falling out of my mouth and needing lots of dental work. And I was then retired and could not afford paying my rent or paying my dentist. And I needed to get teeth, which I still don't have all of them. So, but it was okay. I'm very flexible in my life. I've been on my own since I was 18. I've lived in all over the world with the Air Force. We're an Air Force family. I was in the Air Force for 3 years. So I'm very flexible. Nothing bothers me. I don't get my feathers ruffled. You just deal with things as they come. But so the reality set in that I was in this situation. And a lady, I was riding on the tracks home one night, and we were talking, and she said she was going home. I asked her if she was going home from work, and she says, no, I'm going home. And I said, well, where do you live? She says, over by the gateway in the road home. And I said, the road home? I said, what is that? And she said, it's a homeless shelter. And I said, you live there? And I said, I didn't even know there was one. And I'm not from Utah originally, and I'd lived in the city for a while, but never had heard of the road home. So anyway, 3 weeks later, I was at the door of the road home with my little suitcase and ready to go into a homeless situation. I was so grateful. It was a world that I had never been in before. The environment was way different than what I was accustomed to, or the people that I would not have known or gotten to know. So this has been a 2-year education that I could never have got by reading books about the shelter system, a homeless situation in the United States. I couldn't have known all these wonderful, incredible people that live in the homeless shelter with me. There are many different reasons for people being in the shelter. There's all different walks of life. There's people fresh out of prison. A couple of my roommates have been murderers. And we had many who have been drug addicted, alcoholism, from a severe abuse in their families. They're all different walks of life, but they all have very great value. Our Heavenly Father loves each and every one of them and is concerned about them. And we as a community here in Utah have shown the concern and love, Christ-like love for these people. I have never, ever seen such generous, loving, kind, and endearing people that are in our community that just serve and serve and serve and give and give and give from their hearts. It is amazing. I was very fortunate. I had retirement income, so I never had to take any of the services, the food stamps or Obama phones or general assistance or whatever. So I never had to use those services. But all the people that I lived with, most of them did. I saw them struggling with all these different addictions or with mental issues. And this is where I'd like to go back to the discussion that what we should take the road home and move it out of the Rio Grande area. And I see a great value in that to a certain point. It's too long of a discussion to go into here, but I'd be glad to share with anybody who would like to go into in-depth. I have been in the trenches. I know these people. They're amazing. And but they need to be categorized where they can get the best help. And my feelings are that we're not always, the community is not responsible particularly for this, but the system, that we need to set up a system that's going to address this problem. There is a serious, serious problem, and Matt brought it up too, where we have people sleeping on the streets. They're passed out on the streets. In the mornings when I had to exit in the morning, you had to be out at 8 o'clock. Before it was 6:15, so we had to be out on the street at 6:15 in the morning. So that was changed. So very good positive changes have been made in the last year or two. But during the winter months, there was a man, they were cleaning the sidewalks in the morning, and I said, that man hasn't moved all this morning. So I walked over and to see if I could find a pulse, and he was dead. That happens it happens not often, but enough to where you would think there is a serious problem here. Usually drug overdose, alcoholic, that have passed out and became hypothermia or whatever. So there's many reasons. But these people that are on the streets, they're shooting up drugs, they're just sleeping on the streets, they have all their property on the streets. It is a mess. And it's right across the street from Gateway Center, which is now losing all of its clients because the addition to City Creek and other reasons. But I roomed with people who would, in the morning, make their shoplifting lists. And this is shocking. I mean, you think, oh, I need some mascara, I need this, I need hair color, I need this. They weren't making lists to go shopping for the other person, they were shoplifting. And I think of all the stores at Gateway, how they've struggled just financially, just to stay alive, and then have people over there just shoplifting. I mean, that's what they do.
And I think it's been very valuable to hear your thoughts. We're going to give the whole group some homework, and you as well, because it would be great for this group to hear the interests that you have. So thank you for sharing this initial bit of information with us.
One thing to think about, now she said to throw out things, solutions. I think when people come to the homeless shelter, they should be a screening. I'd say 70% of the people that come have mental illness, severe mental illness, some of them, anxiety or whatever it is, but severe mental illness, unable to take care of themselves, to think rationally, to take care of themselves basically. They don't have ID, they've lost their ID. Then you have the drug addicted. You have the people who are just there temporarily who need some help. You have people with medical issues. So you have 4 things. Put them in a categorize them and help so they can best be helped. There are people on the streets, the ones who are taking drugs, alcohol, etc. They have no desire to go back to work. They don't want to work. They sell the prescription drugs that they have to make money, they steal, they whatever to get the money to buy their drugs. That's all they're interested in. Taking them put them into a work program. Take the people that aren't going to work, that 1/3 of the people, or how many it is, the ones that are sitting out in the street all day, they have no desire to better themselves, put them in another area of the city. Have them, and I've written up a kind of a proposal, and I'll give you a copy of that. But this is what needs to be considered. There are people who really do want to make a change in their life. They need help because they need the guidance to do that. But they're the ones who are sincere about that. Help them, and employment and things like that. Housing isn't always the answer for people who are mentally ill. Putting them in a house somewhere where they can't even take care of themselves, they're going to end up back in the shelter in about 3 months.
Thank you, Ann. And now Scott, would you?
I'm sorry. We're on. I was going to tie it back to interest. Is that okay? I was going to tie what Ann was talking about back to interest.
You can do that quickly and then to Scott.
Yes. Some of the interest there, and I don't know the answer, but is perhaps an interest to make sure that we have facilities in the community to deal with what you're calling categorization, sort of the different groupings of homeless individuals. Anyway, that's it. That's the interest.
Good. Scott?
Great. Matt, we all appreciate what you do, and I promise you'll be in a higher place in heaven than me, for sure. So, you know, as we've looked at this challenge over the last 9 months, and we've gotten together, and as we mentioned to you, we'd never talk about relocating the shelter until the very last couple of months, when it came to us that it was very clear the root cause analysis kind of led back to that area down there. In your mind, and thinking about best practices, could we build a better, let's call it facility, because it might be Crossroads, it might be VOA, who knows what it'd be, but could we build a better facility that meets some of the criteria that Ann talked about, that serves our brothers and sisters better, and it meets their needs almost instantaneously? I'll be the first to say, this commission, I don't like it when people say to me, there will always be homelessness. It's almost like saying there will always be polio, or there will always be this. So in my mind, preventative steps, but can you envision in any way that we could build a better facility that would treat our brothers and sisters and get them back as productive citizens of our community, short of housing? And that's a part of it, we get that. But could we do that? And I guess the follow-up question would be, where would you relocate that? Or where would you keep it? Would you keep it right there? A better facility to meet the needs of our brothers and sisters?
Yeah, well, in the preface to your question, you amputated my response, which is housing. Because in creating more housing, which is a better facility, and the kind of care which I described earlier that includes addiction recovery and mental health services, that's what creates the outflow that would create greater capacity within the sheltering system. When you have 2/3 or more of the shelter being consumed as this receptacle for people who have nowhere else to go, then it's in our interest to see, let's create something better where people can go. And if they're going to go there, let's have them go there and be there, which is housing and those services. So we see that as creating the kind of outflow that doesn't have us creating a larger receptacle with a few more partners around the table, but outflow, which means that we don't build an emergency room that's 3 times the size of a hospital, but create a better plan for housing that has more people staying in housing and not in this cycle of poverty and self-destruction that has them coming into the shelter and living there.
So my question really was more about, and I'll use the LDS hospital analogy. You know, when LDS hospital was thinking of relocating, the docs up there, most of the staff, and I was on the IHC board when this happened, they said, no, we can't relocate. This is where we are going to stay. And I remember being at a board meeting when the IHC people said, we can build a better hospital. And we talked to the docs about that, and the docs kept saying, nope, it's right here. We're not going to that Murray place. And as that evolved, that conversation, we build a better facility. IMC is now recognized as one of the best in the world. And so my question is really more about building a better facility that would serve the needs of the second someone walked in and that. Do you ever envision that as a possibility or something that could be better or would help our brothers and sisters?
Would it be hard to improve the existing facility? I think that anyone around the table or anyone who's had a tour or anyone who's driven past, I think that would be real low-hanging fruit. You could do a lot of things that would improve the existing facility. But going back to Forrest's question earlier, that what keeps us up at night is the idea of the prospect of this valley growing at a significant rate, about rent prices being where all sorts of families can't get there. They got to move somewhere in the outskirts, and I mean the outskirts, way out of town. And how is a shelter, by virtue of its key functions, going to try to meet that need through better design or newer molding? We've got to do more. I would suggest it's our interest to see more happening for people who are suffering with mental illness, as Ann has described, or with substance abuse addiction, or those that are in the throes of this desperation and have them living in the sheltering system. And until we can help address the root causes that are causing this congregation of humanity with nowhere else to go to turn to the shelter, then I don't know what kind of design, how we build a better bucket.
Michelle, I'm going to go to you, and then we're going to start to wrap up. A lot of people I know have commitments that they have to make, and then we just want to do a couple summary comments for this meeting, and then we'll go from there. So go ahead, Michelle.
Well, the one thing I was going to say is what I heard, at least in the presentation that Matt gave and a lot of his answers to the questions, is it isn't a question of do we move one facility, do we keep it where it is. The bigger question and the name of this commission is the homeless services, not just the homeless shelter, all of the services as a package. And I think the challenge for the group is to sort of ultimately identify what is it in terms of the package of services that as a community we want to give. What does that package look like? And then comes the next step of where do you do that? And to some extent that does overlap with what the county is doing. So it's the physical location, but it's not the physical location of any one of them.
Good. Thank you. I just want to say thank you. to everyone. Before I turn the time over to Gail to summarize, I want to say thank you, and please, the homework is, please come back for our next meeting with your list of best interests, what you think, I think as Michelle outlined and described, so we can have that discussion. Yes, and we will also, thank you, we will also be discussing that as well in our smaller group meetings. We will be having smaller group meetings, but I think the process that we're going to undertake is going to be to start bringing together a lot of the interests that some of which you've begun to share in the smaller groups, and then back here to report to the big group. So please bring back your best interests to the next large group meeting so we can talk about those. We'll be talking about those as well in the smaller groups. Thanks, Michelle. And now I'd like to turn some time over to Gail.
I think this has been a very informative and worthwhile presentation and discussion. Appreciate your interest and your questions and comments. Everything helps to see a little clearly what the need is and what possibly the solutions might be. That will take a while. Along with Palmer, I too would like you not only to think about your best interests, but your best thinking, and bring back your comments, your thoughts, your preparations about how we can move forward as we discuss these issues. So thank you for being here. We appreciate your attention and your time and all that you do to help the homeless in this community.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.